Good evening, everybody. Our top stories. The body of President George H.W. Bush has arrived in Texas, where it will lie in repose throughout this evening until his funeral tomorrow morning. Earlier today, a state funeral was held at the National Cathedral in Washington. President Trump and the First Lady joined other living ex-presidents to pay their respects to the 41st. Presidential historian Doug Weed joins us here tonight with his perspective on Mr. Bush's accomplishments and more. Also tonight, China's communist government in its state-run media newly supportive of a trade deal with the United States. President Trump says he will settle for nothing less than a great deal, and there will be no deal otherwise. President Trump has said all along his administration would stay tough and end the unfair trade practices and outright thievery of the Chinese.
China is going to end up treating us fairly. For many years they had free rein. They don't have free rein anymore. Last year we lost $500 billion on trade with China. We can't let that happen.
We'll take up the president's efforts to fight back against China, and we'll be joined by Congressman Andy Biggs to talk about the president's border wall and whether it will ever be built. Will this government be shut down in 2 weeks? And what will be his questions to James Comey when the former FBI director testifies before the House committees this week. And the radical Dems remain out of touch. Senator Mazie Hirono says the Dems themselves are out of touch with voters because, are you ready for this? They're just too smart.
We're really good at shoving out all the information that touch people here but not here. And I have been saying at all of our Senate Democratic retreats that we need to speak to the heart, not in a manipulative way.
Well, there you are. And we take up the aloof, patronizing radical Dems with Republican political strategist Ed Rollins. And we begin tonight with the casket of former President George Herbert Walker Bush, now lying in repose in Houston, Texas. His body arrived there just moments ago, returning from a funeral service in Washington, D.C., attended by 4 living presidents, including President Trump. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel has the story.
He valued character over pedigree, and he was no cynic. He looked for the good in each person, and he usually found it. Dad taught us that public service is noble and necessary.
Former President George W. Bush eulogized his father today, just 8 months after losing his mother.
The best father a son or daughter could have. And in our grief, I just smile knowing that Dad is hugging Robin and holding Mom's hand again.
The majestic National Cathedral was packed with more than 3,200 invited guests, honoring the life and legendary public service of George Herbert Walker Bush. President Trump was on hand with the 4 living former presidents, but the sitting president didn't get the warmest of welcomes, a handshake from his predecessor, while the former First Lady he beat not making eye contact. Former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney spoke of the 41st president as a giant.
I believe it will be said that no occupant of the Oval Office was more courageous, more principled, and more honorable than George Herbert Walker Bush.
Former Senator Alan Simpson noted the former president's legendary loyalty, even when Simpson was struggling politically.
At that time, his popularity rating was 93%. Mine was 0.93%. And so off we went. The media, of course, all gathered as we headed to Marine One. And George said, "Now wave to your pals over there in the media, Al."
He placed great value on a good joke. That's why he chose Simpson to speak.
Presidential historian and biographer John Meacham sought to provide some historical context to Mr. Bush's term in office.
For Lincoln and Bush both called on us to choose the right over the convenient, to hope rather than to fear, and to heed not our worst impulses, but our best instincts.
And a lifetime's not too long to live as friends.
John Meacham actually read his eulogy to former President Bush before he passed away. And with his trademark humility, Mr. Bush said, That's a lot about me, John. Lou?
Mike, thank you very much. Mike Emanuel. Well, joining us tonight with some perspective on the day's events and the 41st President of the United States, presidential historian, former special assistant to President George H.W. Bush, Doug Weed joins us. Doug, good to have you with us.
Thank you, Lou.
An impressive send-off. Your thoughts about all that was said today, the man's biography, his achievements?
It was beautiful, I thought. A great tribute to him, a great president. I think history's going to rank him as great because he ended the Cold War. And some of this confusion today, there are people saying you can't love Donald Trump and love George H.W. Bush. Well, I love Donald Trump and what he's doing to turn around America. I also love George H.W. Bush for ending the Cold War and dismantling that Soviet Union.
Yeah, in managing the end of what was the Soviet Union, I think most would argue that the fall of the Berlin Wall marked the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, and that it was under the administration of Ronald Reagan, which actually the Soviet Union itself and Marxist-Leninism were defeated. But George Bush deserves great credit, as you say, for managing that complex geopolitical event throughout Europe.
He subscribed to Napoleon's axiom that you never interrupt your enemy when they're in the process of defeating themselves. And Lou, we had people come to us for lobbying for the Baltic states, and they said, send troops now. We will never get another chance like this in 100 years. But George H.W. Bush had his eye on Moscow. He's going to want, if he's got the king in checkmate, he's not going to pick up a pawn. He's going to stay with the king till he wins the game.
And Doug, the media coverage could not have been more glowing than it seemed to me what we witnessed today and throughout this week. Your thoughts?
Well, it wasn't accurate. I saw Frank Sesno the other day. I really like him. I saw him say, boy, they knew how to treat the media. George H.W. Bush knew how to treat the media. And I saw it at breakfast, and I almost spit the Cheerios out my nose because I remember the moment in George Herbert Walker Bush's White House where we got the word anybody caught with Frank Sesno is fired on the spot, because he was going down the list calling staffers at the White House trying to get information. And David Hoffman was banned. Anybody seen in the presence of David Hoffman from the Washington Post will be fired on the spot. They had to move him out. George Will, Newsweek was in the deep freeze. So the media relations with presidents has always been tough, and it's always been combative. There's nothing new that's going on right now.
Isn't it strange how truth is often so vigorously at odds with narrative in these days? Doug, thanks so much, and we'll be talking with you here later in the broadcast. Doug Weed.
Thanks, Lou.
Thank you. And the other major news, of course, revolving around the Mueller witch hunt today in the D.C. swamp. The special counsel's office recommending little or no jail time at all for former National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn, citing his valuable contributions to the investigation. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge with the story.
According to the sentencing memo, Special Counsel Robert Mueller recommended no jail time for the former National Security Advisor based on Mike Flynn's substantial cooperation, including 19 interviews, some covering any links between Russia and the Trump campaign, as well as the Trump transition team. Quote, his early cooperation was particularly valuable because he was one of the few people with long-term and first-hand insight regarding events and issues under investigation by the Special Counsel Office. The memo continues. The defendant's decision to plead guilty and cooperate likely affected the decisions of related first-hand witnesses to be forthcoming, and it hints more legal action is ahead. Some of that benefit may not be fully realized at this time. What's attracting the most attention is the heavily redacted sections, blacked out by the special counsel, citing sensitive information about ongoing investigations. While a careful reading indicates Flynn is helping a handful of probes, the documents suggest at least one goes beyond the special counsel mandate.
People are amenable to continuing to be available. after sentencing. But again, the general rule is that when the filings by the government are made and they're ready to go forward with sentencing, the cooperation of the individuals is essentially at the end.
While the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, likened the Flynn guilty plea to, quote, spinning on the sidewalk with major repercussions for many, the senior Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee tweeted that most of the details are redacted, signals he has given far more than we or the president may know. Flynn is now among a handful of former Trump associates who pled guilty to lying to federal investigators, which is a process crime. His sentencing is scheduled for December 18th. It's not clear how federal Judge Emmett Sullivan will view the heavily redacted special counsel memos, which critics say are inconsistent with an open and transparent judicial process, Lou.
Absolutely. Catherine Herridge, thanks so much. Up next here, the president says there are strong signals from China that they'll come to terms on a fair, balanced, reciprocal trade deal with America and stop stealing our technology and intellectual property. We take a look at how big the trade problem really is and some problems that are getting bigger by the day. Also, can Congress come together to fund President Trump's border wall? I said fund it, not a few $billion. No pittances, the full enchilada, $25 billion. We'll ask Congressman Andy Biggs. We come back in just a second. Stay with us. Well, not literally a second, but you know what I mean. President Trump today praised the efforts of China made since his meeting with President Xi over the weekend. The president tweeted this, saying, quote, very strong signals being sent by China once they returned home from their long trip, including stops from Argentina. Not to sound naive or anything, but I believe President Xi meant every word of what he said at our long and hopefully historic meeting, all subjects discussed. The president's optimism comes as the trade deficit with China is now on a pace to set new records. The more than $301 billion deficit through September is the largest ever through the first 9 months of any year in trade with the People's Republic of China. And since the president slapped tariffs on Chinese goods in June, the monthly deficit has risen each month. As the Commission on the Theft of American Intellectual Property has reported, the Chinese theft of intellectual property and our technology running as high as $600 billion a year. The chief financial officer of Chinese telecom company Huawei is now facing extradition to the United States, that after being arrested in Canada today on suspicion of violating U.S. sanctions against Iran. A trade ban was put in place on Chinese tech company ZTE for violating those same sanctions back in March. A $1.4 billion settlement was reached, allowing the company to resume doing business with U.S. companies. Joining me now, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee, the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and member of the influential House Freedom Caucus. Congressman, good to have you with us. Let's start with, first of all, the Mueller probe, the statement on General Flynn and his contributions, the sentencing memorandum. A lot of questions about all the redactions, and again, it amounts to process with 70 hours of testimony, 19 interviews from the general. What do you make of it?
Well, I got the addendum and I looked at it and I said, well, no one can tell what's in there because so much of it's redacted.
Aren't we all getting used to this? I mean, yeah. This for a free nation. We're being treated pretty much like folks, anything but citizens of this country. This must stop.
Well, it's an authoritarian bent in my mind because if you look at it, what's happened here is they've investigated President Trump as a person because he's a political enemy to them. And that's what started this thing, and it started with a guy named Peter Strzok. So this devolves all the way down to somebody like General Flynn who ends up, and they used a really clever line.
I think it started with a guy named Obama.
Well,
and
yeah,
I think
right.
When he decided that he could rationalize spying on a political opponent and to do so with utter impunity, and the deep state resident in the leadership of the FBI and the Department of Justice decided they could support him in that effort.
Yeah, and that's the problem. And we see this abuse of power. It's at the highest levels of those Department of Justice and the FBI, formerly highest levels of the IRS. And we have not been able to get to the bottom of it yet. And so you see somebody like a General Flynn, military hero, and he goes in and they get him on a process crime. And one of the things, they use a real clever piece of language in their memo, basically that means he said he forgot or he didn't remember something happening. And they use that as some kind of basis for prosecuting him. And this is the whole thing. I wish he hadn't pled guilty. Because it's hard for me to believe that any jury would have taken these guys seriously.
The man has been, the special counsel has bankrupted the man. He's had to sell his house to pay his legal fees. He and his family's lives have been absolutely devastated here. It's just a horrible, horrible precedent to watch a special counsel that was supposed to be an improvement on the old independent counsels.
Right.
This is, as you say, it's authoritarian in nature. It is pure hell for whoever they target. Let's turn to, speaking of targeting, fired FBI Director James Comey to appear before the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees. What do you want to know from Comey?
Well, there's a lot to learn from Comey, if he'll tell us. But I mean, let's start with the exculpatory letter that he wrote and the timing of that and the process in exonerating him.
Using, for whatever reason, the same CrowdStrike Democratic firm as when the DNC was hacked. It's really an amazing story of absolutely pathetic, botched leadership under the speakership of one Paul Ryan. It's just incredible. Not a pleasant way, I'm sure, for you all to watch the power shift and the gavel shift to Nancy Pelosi, but there it is. Congressman, always good to see you. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, have a good one.
Congressman Andy Biggs. Be sure to vote in the poll. The question tonight, do you believe the radical Dems and deep state have succeeded to this point in subverting the Trump agenda on border security, illegal immigration, and balanced trade? We'd like to hear what you think. Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. Up next here, the clueless Dems can't seem to put their finger on the pulse of the American people, according to the Dems themselves.
We're not going to make America great again. It was never that great.
The crumbs that they are giving to workers to kind of put the schmooze on is so pathetic.
The economy is still rigged against working people.
Last year, we gave the military a $700 billion budget increase, which they didn't even ask for.
The ideas that we campaigned on, which a few years ago were seen to be radical ideas, are now mainstream.
Bernie, I think they're still pretty radical. We'll find out if they become mainstream. Folks, we're going to see a lot of those people. It's going to be exciting, isn't it? We'll take that up and much more. Right after the break, Ed Rollins joins me. Stay with us. GM CEO Mary Barra telling lawmakers from Ohio and Maryland today she's keeping an open mind about keeping production jobs that she announced were being, unallocated, although she doesn't want to raise expectations either. Barra was on Capitol Hill today talking about the announcement last week, announcing that GM would cut 15,000 jobs, a decision strongly criticized, of course, by President Trump. The radical Dems are often out of touch with real American voters. One liberal luminary claims that's not why their party is having trouble winning over voters.
One of the things that we Democrats have a really hard time is connecting to people's hearts instead of here. We have a really hard time doing that, and one of the reasons that it was told to me at one of our retreats was that we Democrats know so much. That is true, and we have to kind of tell everybody how smart we are.
I don't I think she probably should keep it a secret how smart she is. Apparently the Dems are out of touch with reality, period. It's hard to believe, but there are three midterm races to be called yet. Think of that, still. We're December 5th. Election officials claim they're still counting ballots. North Carolina's 9th district had been called for Republican Mark Harris, but was uncalled because of claims of voter fraud with mail-in absentee ballots. Do you find this complicated enough yet? Well, in New York, Democrat Nat McMurray conceded his race against Republican Congressman Chris Collins, but Fox News has yet to call the race. There are fewer than 3,000 votes separating the two. In California, the 21st district was called for Republican Congressman David Valadao, but further ballot counting put the race back in play, and now the Democrat T.J. Cox is in the lead. Do you see the theme there? It looks like the earlier they vote and the later they count, the better it is for Democrats. It should be mentioned as well, 7 other races in which Republicans led across the country on election night somehow swung to the Dems after further, of course, counting. Joining me now, someone who knows how to win elections. He served as national campaign director for the '84 Reagan-Bush campaign. They only won 49 out of 50 states. Top Republican strategist, top strategist for Great America PAC, former Reagan White House political director, Fox Business political analyst Ed Rollins. First of all, I get a kick out of Senator Hirono. This is just...
If there weren't the Kavanaugh hearings, no one would even know who she was. She obviously comes from Hawaii and she's not front and center, but there must be something in the water there or the air, that the fact that she's saying Democrats are too smart, that they have a total inability to communicate with ordinary people, and you have to touch their heart. That sounds like some mystique communications system, and I expect her to be running for president in another week or two.
And no doubt about it, because bringing all of that talent and intellect to bear. But it's a strange, to me, a very strange process where we are watching this president, who is now very optimistic about doing a deal with China. We've actually seen a little thawing here on the part of the national left-wing media, in which they were giving him some support Monday, took it away yesterday with an 800-point decline in the Dow. Today they're back, talking about maybe being halfway decent and fair themselves.
If he doesn't win this battle, and he will win this battle.
Which battle is that?
The battle with the Chinese. Basically, as you have said so well on the show, they have stolen so much of our intellectual property, what have you, that we'll be in second place very quickly, and we'll stay there forever. And my sense is this is drawing the line, and he has to get the win here.
Yeah, and it's important that there be a sense of history about this, because this president is trying to repair the stupid mistakes, the horrible mistakes of 3 presidents who preceded him. And that's Obama, that's Bush, and that's Clinton. And in 1990, giving favored nation status to the Chinese, and letting them define themselves as a developing nation, not to be held accountable for anything within the framework of the WTO. This goes on today. This president is going to change it, or else.
I'd say they're pretty well developed at this point in time, and they're certainly been pretty good thieves for a long time, and they think that's the way to do it. And there's a great history there, and he's the only one who's going to stand up there and stop it. And I think to a certain extent, we have to keep. I know you keep educating people, but we have to keep educating people how this is meaningful and how this is important, and that woman that's the chairman of GM basically saying as they're opening more plants in Mexico and closing plants in America, that this is going to be good.
5 in North America.
Good for the American, and the 14,000
people being laid off. Do you know how fortunate we are? We've got a president who has focused on this with intensity and with power. And this Mary Barra is making no sense. I mean, her company putting all of that production, I understand she's making sense for her bottom line with a very clever piece of labor arbitrage. You just step across the border and pay a fraction of the money. This is an outrage, and the American people should be shutting it down. I can't tell you how many Americans I run into, viewers of this broadcast and loyal viewers, who still say, you know, it's just corporate America. It's just the way they have to run their companies. That's sheer balderdash. The fact is that this is a country that is more than a home market. It is the home of these corporations, and it's where they have thrived, and they have a responsibility to all Americans.
And they get all the benefits. The government gives them benefits every time they turn around. So it's not like it's a free market where they're out doing...
GM picked up $200 million just in the first installment on these tax cuts. This president pushing tax cuts that were, you know, immensely beneficial to corporate America. And this is the thanks he gets. I think he's probably just about tired of being stabbed in the back. It's just a guess.
He should be. And let's have an aggressive...
Is he going to win?
I think he's going to win because I think he's tough. And I think at the end of the day, as you watch the funeral today, he's not going to be lovey-dovey with all the Democrats like other presidents have in the past. And I think, and taking nothing away from Bush, and this was Bush's day, but at the end of the day, this is, you know, we're two different parties. We need to try two different agendas, and it's his agenda is really what matters today.
Yeah, the problem is it's also the establishment agenda in both parties. Ed Rollins,
thank you.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
Good to see you, my friend. Up next, the last high-ranking FBI official who worked on both the Hillary email investigation and, yes, the Russia collusion probe is retiring. We take that up much more. Attorneys Harmeet Dillon and Greg Jarrett join me here next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. On Wall Street, the markets closed in honor of President George H.W. Bush. Futures on the Dow Jones Industrials as we approach tomorrow's trading down just about 200 points following yesterday's nearly 800-point plunge in the Dow. S&P futures down about 18. NASDAQ futures down 54. And I should point out, it's awfully early, and these numbers at this stage seldom mean much. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. The left-wing Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling against a federal law that would make it illegal to encourage immigrants to enter the country illegally. How about that? A panel of 3 Democratic-appointed judges decided such a rule violates the First Amendment. And Defense Secretary James Mattis today is exercising his rights of free speech, announcing the 6,000 troops now stationed at our southern border will remain there through, are you ready? The end of January. So about just almost 2 months left. The deployment was set to expire on December 15th. And according to a new report, DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen may not be fired after all. Her newly observed toughness on illegal immigration and the caravans has reportedly impressed the president. We'll see. The FBI's corrupt chief of counterintelligence, retiring, Bill Priestap, helped oversee the Bureau's investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails and the supposed Trump-Russia collusion. He leaves his post by the end of this year. His departure, one of the last from the Obama era. Among those who have also left or fired, they include former FBI Director James Comey, his Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, both fired, agents Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, and General Counsel James Baker. Joining me now, Harmeet Dillon, the Dillon Law Group Managing Partner, a board member of the Republican National Lawyers Association, and RNC Committeewoman for California, Greg Jarrett, Fox legal analyst, also author of the New York Times bestseller, The Russia Hoax. Great to have you both here. And Harmeet, let me begin with you, because you lived with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. What a test that is for reason, for law. How does your reaction to their ruling?
Well, Lou, I'm a passionate First Amendment lawyer, and I found this decision to be crazy because it wasn't even what the plaintiff who was appealing, the defendant who was appealing the case, asked for. These judges actually, after seeing the original briefs, reached out and asked them to brief this other issue, which nobody was asking about, which is this law so vague? And the law, by the way, is a law that says that it is a crime to encourage somebody to come into the country or stay in the country illegally. Pretty clear. Just like it's a crime to encourage somebody to break any other law. law. But the court said in this case, because they're sympathetic to people encouraging their relatives to stay illegally or lawyers encouraging their clients to stay illegally, that the law violated the First Amendment. I think this case is ripe for an appeal to the United States Supreme Court. Hopefully that decision will be reversed. It makes no sense.
And if that's the case, Greg, it'll just add to the high percentage of reversals of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Right. But at this juncture, they're not even adhering to common sense.
No, so they contort the law and the facts. You could make $1 billion betting against the Ninth Circuit. They get it wrong all the time. Classic example. This has nothing to do with the First Amendment and free speech. You know, it's bedrock law in America that if you provide substantial assistance in the commission of a crime, it's aiding and abetting. It's a violation of the specific statute. But the Ninth Circuit, you know, I don't know if they're smoking a lot of that legal marijuana out there, but, you know, they got it all wrong.
If so, they must have been on some illegal marijuana for years, because it hasn't been a change in pattern. Yeah. Let's go to Bill Priestap, one of the central figures at the FBI, retiring. You know, no consequences.
No, of course not. None of the people who are associated with the Obama administration or Bill and Hillary Clinton have any consequences for their misconduct and criminal acts. You know, Priestap is a part of the Comey cabal. He helped cleanse the exoneration statement of Hillary Clinton's criminality. He also was involved in deceiving the court to spy on the Trump campaign. And this is a guy who stonewalled Congress for the longest time, and then finally, when he was forced to testify behind closed doors, he laid all the blame on Peter Strzok. Good riddance of Bill Priestap.
Good riddance. Harmeet, what about the Republicans? Frankly, they look like fools now, particularly in the House, save the House Intelligence Committee led by Devin Nunes. I mean, they had the clock run out on them from Fast and Furious, from Benghazi forward, lots of blather, lots of hot air, and no delivery. This is, I think, in retrospect, and it's before the end of this Congress and control, Republican control. I mean, it is awful to contemplate what a failure they represent in their investigations from those committees, isn't it?
It has been an impotent performance by many of our Republican members of Congress, unfortunately. And, you know, people who we all respect originally, like Trey Gowdy, have made a lot of excuses for some of these guys and said that they think they're great and so forth. And so here we are with the final minutes on the clock. And it's now Comey is finally going to come and testify, but I have no hope that anything is going to come out of that that's worthwhile. And
are the Republicans learning anything?
These guys are getting off scot-free. You know, certainly I am one who is very disappointed. We're going to have better people running in the next circle. But I mean, you know, we also have the whole mishap with the NRCC hacking and so forth. I mean, it's crazy. It's not our best and brightest hour here, unfortunately, Lou.
Harmeet Dillon, Greg Jarrett. I've got to give you the last word here.
Comey's the master of deception. He is as clever and cunning and slippery as an eel. He will not give anything of substance to the committees.
You know, you never hear those kinds of accolades about a Republican. Greg Jarrett, Harmeet Dillon, thank you both for being with us. We appreciate it. Thanks, Up next, the shameless left-wing national media. You probably won't be surprised to know that they have used the funeral of President George H.W. Bush, some of them, to attack President Trump.
This is the embodiment of just how different it can be. And that's a message to Trump.
He signed into law the Clean Air Act Amendment of 1990, one of the most sweeping environmental statutes ever. This president that we have now is trying to unravel everything that he did and Obama did.
Under Donald Trump, the office of the presidency has been debased in a way that is unimaginable.
We celebrate George H.W. Bush's legacy and fear the next 2 years of Mr. Trump's wild White House ride.
I think Prince Charles has felt more comfortable in New Guinea than this president felt here today.
Wow. Talk about left-wing elitists. Presidential historian Doug Weed joins us again tonight. We're going to take all of that up and much more right after these quick messages. Stay with us. We'll be right back. GM CEO Mary Barra telling lawmakers from Ohio and Maryland today she's keeping an open mind about keeping production jobs that she announced were being, unallocated, although she doesn't want to raise expectations either. Barra was on Capitol Hill today talking about the announcement last week, announcing that GM would cut 15,000 jobs, a decision strongly criticized, of course, by President Trump. The radical Dems are often out of touch with real American voters. One liberal luminary claims that's not why their party is having trouble winning over voters.
One of the things that we Democrats have a really hard time is connecting to people's hearts instead of here. We have a really hard time doing that, and one of the reasons that it was told to me at one of our retreats was that we Democrats know so much that is true, and we have to kind of tell everybody how smart we are.
I think she probably should keep it a secret how smart she is. Apparently the Dems are out of touch with reality, period. It's hard to believe, but there are three midterm races to be called yet. Think of that, still. We're December 5th. Election officials claim they're still counting ballots. North Carolina's 9th district had been called for Republican Mark Harris, but was uncalled because of claims of voter fraud with mail-in absentee ballots. Do you find this complicated enough yet? Well, in New York, Democrat Nat McMurray conceded his race against Republican Congressman Chris Collins, but Fox News has yet to call the race. There are fewer than 3,000 votes separating the two. In California, the 21st district was called for Republican Congressman David Valadao, but further ballot counting put the race back in play, and now the Democrat T.J. Cox is in the lead. Do you see the theme there? It looks like the earlier they vote and the later they count, the better it is for Democrats. It should be mentioned as well, 7 other races in which Republicans led across the country on election night somehow swung to the Dems after further, of course, counting. Joining me now, someone who knows how to win elections. He served as national campaign director for the '84 Reagan-Bush campaign. They only won 49 out of 50 states. Top Republican strategist, top strategist for Great America PAC, former Reagan White House political director, Fox Business political analyst Ed Rollins. First of all, I get a kick out of Senator Hirono. This is just...
If there weren't the Kavanaugh hearings, no one would even know who she was. She obviously comes from Hawaii and she's not front and center, but there must be something in the water there or the air, that the fact that she's saying Democrats are too smart, that they have a total inability to communicate with ordinary people, and you have to touch their heart. That sounds like some mystique communications system, and I expect her to be running for president in another week or two.
And no doubt about it, because bringing all of that talent and intellect to bear. But it's a strange, to me, a very strange process where we are watching this president, who is now very optimistic about doing a deal with China. We've actually seen a little thawing here on the part of the national left-wing media, in which they were giving him some support Monday, took it away yesterday with an 800-point decline in the Dow. Today they're back, talking about maybe being halfway decent and fair themselves.
If he doesn't win this battle, and he will win this battle.
Which battle is that?
The battle with the Chinese. Basically, as you have said so well on the show, they have stolen so much of our intellectual property, what have you, that we'll be in second place very quickly, and we'll stay there forever. And my sense is this is drawing the line, and he has to get the win here.
Yeah, and it's important that there be a sense of history about this, because this president is trying to repair the stupid mistakes, the horrible mistakes of 3 presidents who preceded him. And that's Obama, that's Bush, and that's Clinton. And in 1990, giving favored nation status to the Chinese, and letting them define themselves as a developing nation, not to be held accountable for anything within the framework of the WTO. This goes on today. This president is going to change it or else?
I'd say they're pretty well developed at this point in time, and they're certainly pretty good thieves for a long time, and they think that's the way to do it. And there's a great history there, and he's the only one who's going to stand up there and stop it. And I think to a certain extent, we have to keep. I know you keep educating people, but we have to keep educating people how this is meaningful and how this is important, and that woman that's the chairman of GM basically saying as they're opening more plants in Mexico and closing plants in America that this is going to be good.
5 in North America.
Good for the American and the 14,000.
Do you know how
being laid off
fortunate we are? We've got a president
who
has focused on this with intensity and with power. And this Mary Barra is making no sense. I mean, her company putting all of that production, I understand she's making sense for her bottom line with a very clever piece of labor arbitrage. You just step across the border and pay a fraction of the money. This is an outrage, and the American people should be shutting it down. I can't tell you how many Americans I run into, viewers of this broadcast and loyal viewers, who still say, you know, it's just corporate America.